Hello, fabulous friends, fans, and superstars. Welcome to Synchronicity Web TV. I am your host, Nadiya Shah, and this is your moment of synchronicity. Well, I'm so happy and excited to celebrate with you today Acyuta-bhava Das of NIGHTLIGHT Astrology. I know you've seen him on my channel before, and I know that you know I have talked about him before as well, because he is one of the very few astrologers I've actually watched on a somewhat regular basis. And, you know, I really try not to watch other astrologers because I don't want to accidentally plagiarize somebody. But Acyuta does things that is in his own unique way. So I know I'm not going to accidentally plagiarize him. But also, he brings so much love. He brings so much spirit to what he does. It's like he remembers that astrology is rooted in spiritual practice. And that is part of what I love about his work, and also that he's got a lot of skills as well, as you are about to see. Now, I am especially honored and very happy that Acyuta-bhava Das is going to be coming to Synchronicity University with his very own 5-part course looking at the mystical roots of astrology. And this course is so hands-on, like you will be able to immediately apply what you learn to see your own chart differently, to see the planets, the houses, the signs differently. And I think that's part of the gift in reminding us that astrology is mystical, it's spiritual, but you can actually see it in your chart as well. I think that's all so very special. And if you sign up very, very soon, you can choose your tuition rate as low as just $5 a class, an unheard of rate to learn from the likes of a world-renowned astrologer like Acyuta-bhava Das. Acyuta, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Nadiya. It's good to be hanging out with your audience again.
Yeah, it's really nice. I always love hanging out with you because I learn a lot. And that's one thing I love about your astrology and the way that you present it, is that you get me thinking of it in new ways. And so let me ask you, when did you make that connection between mysticism and mystical practice and astrology?
Yeah, I have a very bizarre story in terms of how I came to astrology. I was pretty much for all of my 20s, I was really invested in the study of entheogens, psychedelic plant medicines from different parts of the world. And throughout my 20s, I worked pretty intensively with ayahuasca in South Central America, from that region of the world, and ended up writing a book about it. And it was in those ayahuasca experiences, guided in traditional settings with indigenous healers in that tradition, that I started to take notice of, to put it simply, the psyche speaks in archetypes. And I started becoming fascinated by archetypes. I was a student of literature in graduate school, so literary archetypes were familiar to me. Well, it turns out, the psyche is just brimming with them, and these psychedelic experiences were really just putting the spotlight on their reality in my life. And I was talking about it, and some of the people that I was in South America with said, "Well, you should check out astrology, because what you're talking about is actually, all a part of this archetypal language that is astrology, and also tarot and other forms of divination and stuff like that." So that kind of opened the door for me to be interested in astrology. So I kind of already had this interest in mysticism and altered states. I was practicing yoga, as a personal practice, and so I think they were really connected in that sense in the beginning.
It's amazing to me as well how these archetypal languages, it's like they show up in myth, they show up in astrology. But what's really incredible is that we live these archetypal journeys. It's incredible how no matter where someone is on the planet, no matter where they're born, cultures, it's just incredible how people will live these core archetypal journeys. They show up again and again with different names, with different deities, in different packages, but the same stories are told again and again, and how people live those stories is so fascinating to me. That's really the work of Joseph Campbell as well. He talked about that also.
Yeah. I mean, it was just thinking of, like, some of the early experiences that I had with ayahuasca were really saturated in the sort of religious and spiritual iconography of like the Peruvian Amazon, you know. But I, being a student of literary archetypes and then starting to learn astrology, I was able to say, oh, well, this is kind of like this Roman or Greek story, or, you know. So I definitely feel like the astrology, although it comes from one part of the world, there are so many people in the world from all different places who really point us to the gods, the archetypes in different names and forms. And so I'm interested in all of it, but astrology is I guess, the specific thing that sort of took hold.
Yeah, astrology is like, it ended up being the specific language that allowed you to then turn that exploration of archetypal language into something that could serve, that could enlighten. And so there were so many things I wanted to ask you because, of course, I've watched you on your journey and we've been connected for a while now. And I wanted to ask you about, I've seen you go through this conversion, right? And you even changed your name. I think it's a very powerful thing to change your name. Now, I don't know if you know this, but in South Asian cultures, it's actually a very common thing to change a child's name.
Hmm.
What happens is, in certain parts of South Asia, anyways, what happens is you have your kid, and then if the kid is like giving you a lot of problems, like maybe they're getting sick a lot, maybe they're kind of fussy, the belief is that maybe the vibration of the name doesn't actually suit that kid. And so people will change the name of their kid in hopes that it'll change up the vibration. Now, I kid you not, my parents changed my name legally 4 times in the first 6 months of my life. I kid you not. Like, that
Wow.
is how seriously they took it, that they created documents with totally different names before they settled on Nadiya, which to me is kind of like, I've always thought of it as like proof that I have many past lives, basically.
Yeah,
That they
totally.
felt, yeah, yeah, like they felt connected to me on those different past lives. But it's very powerful to choose your name or to feel open to a new name. So can you talk about that journey, what led you to go on that journey and change your name and what your name means to you now?
Oh yeah, yeah, sure. So I started. I mean, my wife Ashley and I opened a yoga studio together in 2011, and so yoga was a probably the central, like, daily, spiritual practice, I guess you could say, and then astrology, like those two things. And my wife's an herbalist too, so we kind of had a crock pot of herbs, planets, and yoga going on at our studio all the time. And I wanted to deepen my yoga practice, and so I started a private apprenticeship with a teacher on our staff who is like a seasoned veteran, and he's probably 20, 25 years older than me. And I just really trusted him because he had gone through a lifetime of dedication to a yogic path, and his name was Hari Kirtan Das. So he had already gone through initiation in a parampara lineage and so forth. And so I started studying with him, and he was the practitioner of bhakti yoga, Krishna bhakti. There's many forms of bhakti, but this would be like devotion to Krishna and Radha, sort of a divine couple. And I started studying with him, and it just captured my heart. It was just like, I grew up in the Christian church, a preacher's kid, and I'd always been really connected to that Christian message of love and forgiveness and mercy and compassion, but had just not found a real home. I just was no longer identified with the Christian church, but I found a lot of the best qualities that I really loved in bhakti yoga. But there's place for astrology. There's a much broader mystical history, in a sense. Not to compare, because I know a lot of very mystical Christians. But at any rate, so it was just the right home for me. And I started getting really involved. And then I started studying with a guru. It's kind of, it's a way of putting it. It's called aspiring. But, I started really focusing on studying under a particular guru in the larger faith body of my tradition. And then started taking up the vows in practice. Before you take them, you go through a period where you see if you can kind of handle them, like can you do your mantra meditation every day, can you kind of get into the rhythms of monastic life. Of course, the thing about monastic life in India, as many people probably know, is that the Grihastha ashram is a stage in life where you may be married, you have kids, you're very much in the world, but you've also taken on these practices. So I also found it really fitting for that reason. Like, I can do this and be really dedicated to it, but I can just be myself too. At which point the hardest part for me was that when you receive initiation, you take a new name, because I was kind of like, I like my name, I don't really want a new name. But the more that I opened my heart to it, the more that I understood the reasons behind why you receive a new name when you take initiation and stuff like that, I kind of I grew into it. And the name is really beautiful too. It's Acyuta-bhava is a name for Krishna, and Das just means servant. So, like when you hear Ram Das, it means servant of Ram. Ram is one of the names of Krishna, or Vishnu as well. So when I understood the name, I asked my guru afterwards, so what does the name mean? Because I didn't know right off. I know some of the names of Krishna, but didn't know this one. And it comes from a verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is like a sacred book in our tradition, scripture. And in that book, there's a verse that says that unless you're bringing source, let's just call it source, into the conversation, it's not as sweet as it could be. So Acyuta-bhava means like this high, very sweet level of conversational topics. And unless you're sort of like saying, unless you're talking about spiritual stuff, it's not that fun. Unless you're getting back somehow to the spiritual juicy stuff with your friends or your family or whatever, like, it feels a little dry. So that's kind of what the verse is saying. And he was like, kind of in part gave me that name because I'm always on YouTube talking about spiritual stuff.
It's so perfect for you. Yeah, because I was thinking you are always on YouTube talking and really exploring the aspects. Like, one thing I really like about your content is that you will focus in on one particular aspect playing out. Like, for example, recently you posted on Venus trine Neptune, and you dived into the symbol in your own unique way with a lens towards spirituality and the love of God, the love of source. And it was so beautiful. But the thing is that you actually make videos for all these different aspects throughout the week, throughout the month, throughout the years. You have this, and it feels very much like part of your yoga, like part of your spiritual practice is sitting in front of your camera, talking into your mic, and exploring these different astrological aspects that are playing out. I know it's like that for me too, but for you, I just love how I can see that this is part of your yoga.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I think everyone has, the word yoga is, it means union. Some people listening may not know, and really, or to join or yoke things together. So I think for me, it's just, I love astrology. How can we make sure we're linking astrology back to caring for our souls? And I think that's the yoga for me every day, and I see that in you too. That's, I think, why we get along.
Yeah, I think that's part of it for sure. Now, one thing also, you mentioned your wife, and I know you have a family, and I love on social media, I can just see how much you love your family, you love your kids. It's such a beautiful thing. And so, how does all this show up in terms of the kind of father that you are, in terms of parenting? How have you seen, not only, of course, as an astrologer, but this spiritual journey that you've been on, that you've been sharing with your audience? How has it shown up in terms of how you feel about how you're parenting your children as well? Because I know how important that is to you.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the Cancer sun in me. It's funny because I have a Capricorn moon in the 9th house. And really, like, up until getting married and starting to have kids, I feel like I really operated out of my Capricorn moon quite a bit. A lot of study. I lived by myself throughout my 20s, was participating in these rituals, traveling to foreign countries, studying, and very intellectual and stuff like that. And kind of a little I don't know if austere is the right word, disciplined like that, you know? And then I had kids and it was like, um, it's funny, I kind of felt like a Cancer sun as a little boy, actually. But then kind of like the moon took over for a while. And then I feel like since I've been, a dad, it's like I'm operating much more out of my Cancer sun. And in fact, devotional yoga, bhakti yoga really feels like my Cancer sun too. But so I feel like whatever you're seeing of me on Instagram or whatever, doting on my family is just me, growing into this Cancer sun in my birth chart.
Yeah, right? I mean, we really do grow into our sons. Yeah, it's quite phenomenal. And the way that we understand our chart, it deepens as we grow and experience that chart, but also I think our willingness to explore our chart spiritually deepens our
Mm.
understanding of how we're living it through our own spiritual journey.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, in terms of like parenting, um, at this point, one of the things that I think more than teaching my kids like the signs or houses or anything like that, it's been myth, it's been metaphor, it's been stories and trying to expose them to religious diversity from all over the world and trying to expose them to you know uh, sadhana, like daily rituals that can be enjoyable, like putting flowers on the altar at home, or like just what can I do to make spirituality start with magic and fun and curiosity, and so it could be a fairy garden with my wife outside, and I think that's just as valuable as trying to teach her about like Leo or something. That's kind of where it's at right now, but I do have the dream that someday I'll sit down and be like, all right, let's talk nuts and bolts. Here's how you read a birth chart.
That'll be fun. I hope that they feel called to that and they come to you with that one day. Okay, so speaking of astrology, because you are going to be teaching this course on the mystical roots of traditional astrology, and you are just the perfect person to teach it because you bring that spiritual element, but you got the skills as a traditional astrologer as well. You got the knowledge, and I love the way that you bridge them together. So I'm really looking forward to your class. And for those of you out there, remember, it's just a couple of weeks left to choose your tuition rate as low as just $5 a class to learn from Acyuta-bhava Das as part of this 5-part course, which is really so exciting. And so let me ask you, because I would love to like jump in, get a little feel. Now, something I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you away a little secret. I don't know if I'm going to actually leave this in or edit it out once we get on YouTube, but I am planning to take all of September off. And it's really scary. Like, it's like, oh my goodness, September 1st will be exactly 16 years as a full-time astrologer.
Oh my God,
I know.
congrats.
And don't get me wrong, I have enjoyed every minute of it. Well, look, part of the journey, of course, is moments where maybe it doesn't feel as easy, but we realize that it's part of the spiritual journey as well. And I've taken my audience around the world, literally. I'm a Sag moon. I'm living that
Oh,
Sag
I
moon.
know.
Yeah.
I love seeing the pictures.
I'm so glad. I mean, I love it. It's just so wonderful to do astrology, practice astrology, share astrology in these different places in the world, and how that changes me, because I feel like we have these relationships with the world as well. But I've never actually said, okay, I'm not going online for a month. I've never said I'm not going online for a week. Like, of course, I have to talk to my mom every day. I am a Cancer rising, so I'm going to be on WhatsApp with her.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm like, it's like a little bit scary. Like, what will happen if I just step away? And of course, I have an incredible team. I have 5 people on my team. They're going to take care of everything. I know you'll be well taken care of as you're teaching this course as well. But I want a preview. All of that
Yeah.
is to say, I want a preview. I want to know. I would love for you to go through the 12 signs. Let's do that and share with us a mystical understanding of the different 12 signs. Let's start with Aries.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Well, one of the questions that I think we ask, or students will ask, like naturally, and I certainly did when I was starting off, was okay, I get the list of adjectives for Aries. A lot of them are related to Mars or fire, or and so you get like a list of keywords, and then you go, well, where did that come from? Like what is the underlying rationale behind those things? And I think that what I find so interesting about ancient astrology, for example, when it comes to the zodiac, is that it appears that the alternation of light and dark in the sun's path of the solar year was so much more nuanced than we realize. So I'll utilizing just a couple of metaphors for each of the signs as we go. I'll just say this first, that it's so much of understanding the signs from this ancient mystical perspective, at least in my mind, has to do with understanding the quality of light that we're dealing with within a full circle of the alternation of light and dark that is the solar year. So with that in mind, if you think about what makes Aries unique as a sign, the starting point of the zodiac is the moment at which we've now entered into the half of the zodiac where there will be more light than darkness. So if you think of light and dark as like yin and yang, we're now on the yang half of the zodiac. The yin half of the zodiac would be Libra through Pisces. There's more darkness in a 24-hour day than there is light. So all of that just sort of setting the stage here so we can roll through all of them. When you get to Aries, in a sense, the scales are tipping from balanced at the equinox to light being more dominant than darkness. And so there's something about Aries perpetually, there's a calling that has to do with tipping the scales intentionally, with will, with courage, with force, and figuring out what it means to tip the scales. And that often is why, for example, we get things like individuality associated with Aries. It's not that Aries is necessarily about individuality in my book. It's just that individuality is one manifestation of what it means to tip the scales. When you tip the scales, you're not concerned about balance or the other as much as you might be having to do something for yourself or something that's very strong-willed or something like that. So I think if you start thinking about Aries from the standpoint of the light and dark and light taking over and the scales being tipped with light and dark, you're getting underneath you're flipping the hood open and starting to get to the truth. Should I keep going?
Yeah, keep going. Taurus.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Okay, so we go into Taurus, and with Taurus, we're talking now about the stabilization of the spring season. We call them solid signs or fixed signs. The thing to remember about Taurus is that the light is gradually increasing, moving up toward the pole star, which is like a fixed ideal that for ancient astrologers represented eternity. So Taurus has this quality of young light reaching toward the divine ideal. So a lot of the images that you get about peace, beauty, wealth, stability, security, it's like a daydream of spring pointed at the pole star that represents the ideal. So it's a very idealistic sign, but it wants that ideal to be realized in the earthy, reality of spring, everything coming into form. So you can get a lot just by thinking about what is Taurus doing with light. It's aiming toward the ideal pole star of the summer solstice. The summer solstice takes us closest to. And it's very ambitious about it, though it doesn't seem like it because it's also a yin or feminine sign, and so it's very gradual and developmental in how it goes about reaching it. If you go to Gemini, then you're getting to the point, a double-bodied sign where there's a transition that's being made. The transition is moving from the gaining of light within the light half of the year to the waning of light within the light half of the year. So on the yin side, it's the same thing. You have the increase of darkness on the dark half of the year, and then you have the decrease of darkness on the dark half of the year. So they're each unique little quadrants of light and dark within two of them within each half of the year. Gemini is the point where you're getting ready to turn the corner from light rising to light setting, now starting to come down. And because of that, there's a sacred play between light and shadow that's a part of Gemini and the duality of Gemini. So if you think about all of those adjectives you learn about stereotypes of Gemini, they change their mind a lot. Or, I remember, the worst one, which is my best friend's Gemini growing up, you'd read a horoscope and it would call Gemini's two-faced. It's really like mean thing to say.
There are songs about that. Oh yeah.
Right. So you have where does that come from? And the idea of this class that we're going to be taking this journey together is really to understand why. What are some of the underlying explanations as to why we understand Gemini, but why? Well, because you have light reaching the ideal, the pole star, the sun rising to the top part of the sky, and as soon as it does, turning and starting to come down. And so one of the things that I would say, like, it defines my best friend, Gemini, is, he will be really interested in something up until he sort of understands it or tastes it on some level, and then he can very easily let go of things and just turn and try something else. So that turning point of light rising, stop, and then light falling, that's what Gemini is taking us up to. And if you see the sun coming up at that time of the year, even in the last 15 degrees of Gemini, you're already starting to feel the turn starting to happen if you watch it every day. And I take students through this in an astronomy program in the course that we have coming up too, so you can actually see it. It's kind of cool. Cancer is here. We're now moving into the darkening half of the light half of the year. So this would be sort of like the yin half of the yang half of the year. Kind of weird, but so you're coming down now from the pole star, from the longest day of the year, closest to the pole star. The arc of the sun is starting to come down. The days are getting gradually shorter. Cancer has so much to do with things like nurturance, remembrance, devotion, care, concern, longing. Why is that? Because it perfectly represents, especially as the home of the moon, the descent of spirit from source into matter. So when you start embodying that descent from light into darkness, one of the meanings that ancient astrologers gave that was about the embodiment of a spirit soul coming into a body. And as such, the descent of Cancer is also about the remembrance of where it comes from. So whether that's the womb or your home or God or however you want to think about it, so much of what we say about Cancer is contained in the turn of light and dark that's happening at the summer solstice going down. With Leo, you're looking at the sustaining of the summer qualities as the light is now waning. So much about Leo, for example, has to do with legacy or pride. A lot of it is about what am I doing that can carry my name or give me some sense of honor or specialness. And a lot of that is aimed at the sustainment of light despite the inevitable dying of light at the same time. The king is dead, long live the king. But what does that mean? It means that in an ideal sense, in an Arthurian legend sense, the king is not a person. It's an archetypal position that is somehow pointing humanity towards divinity. The king and the queen, they are like the center around which the order and goodness of a society should work in this kind of ideal kingdom. So when you're thinking about Leo, you're thinking about the inevitability of death and what lives on beyond it that creates that sense of solar pride. And that's coming from the sustainment of light despite the dying of light at the same time. If you move into Virgo, you're getting into the same turning point, right? We're at a place where we're going to turn and pivot into the dark half of the year. And so much about Virgo is about preparation, meticulous, careful preparation for the harvest moment that is the fall equinox. I'm not the first person to point that out. I remember, Liz Green was the first person I ever read who said that. But that calls on the light quality of the year. So you're looking at the light coming down to the point where it's crossing it's crossing the fall equinox, and at that point at which light and dark are equal, and now darkness is going to be greater than light. So preparing for that with some sacred anxiety, like life is a test, like it matters how good you do on the test, or like it matters that you have a good harvest so you can survive through the winter, and the concern and the diligence surrounding that preparation for judgment or harvest, that it is the entrance into the underworld. That careful, thoughtful quality, I think, is as part of why we say those things about Virgo. It goes back to the light and dark again. So we get into Libra. Should I keep going?
Sure, why not? Yeah.
Okay, I'll round us out. I'll try to take us home through the last six. So Libra, with Libra, we're at that equinox moment, but now we're going into darkness. Libra, I think, is one of the more sophisticated, challenging signs to understand in terms of light and dark, because it's tempting to just think, well, Libra is about balance, right? Because you see the image of the scales. But I think a more appropriate image is the heart being weighed against the feather in the Egyptian underworld. I think it was called the Hall of Mut. But there's there's an ostrich feather, I think it was, and it's like being weighed against the heart. And for Libra, in this, it starts at the time where darkness takes over, and you're going into the metaphorical underworld, and there's judgment that takes place at that point. But we're trying to develop a sense of, so a lot of times you'll hear people talk about the difference between vanity with Libra and like wisdom. Like how am I making a decision based on what other people think versus really knowing what the wise and right thing to do is. And you also see images of justice with a blindfold on. And so there's something about going into the underworld, that space of darkness, that for Libra also has to do with understanding the essence or heart of the situation and acting and making wise judgments from that space, not just based on what what might get you liked or thumbs up or thumbs down in sort of a popularity contest. So anyway, there's a lot more that can be said about Libra. Libra's always the one I end up getting stuck on the longest because I think it's a kind of a tricky one. But let's keep moving into Scorpio. Now we're talking about, it's the yin half of the year, so darkness more than light in the 24-hour period. Now this is Northern Hemisphere metaphor, right? So, but I think it applies archetypally for everyone. You get to Scorpio, and you're talking about the sustainment now of darkness as darkness is also increasing. So it's a polar opposite of Taurus, where you're sustaining light while light is increasing. So, for Scorpio, so much of it comes down to the two sort of ideas. One is you're getting really close to the energy of destruction, right? So that time of year, the light dying like that is associated with decay, with autumn, with death, and with the general energetic principle of destruction. You think of the Hindu trinity of creator, maintainer, destroyer. And Scorpio has a lot of destroyer energy. But what's interesting about it is that you also have a protector, right? So destroyers and protectors, especially in Hindu mythology, are very closely connected. And so I think with Scorpio, because you have that stabilizing energy while darkness is increasing, you get the sense of a vigilance around darkness, sometimes a paranoia, but a sense of protecting and guarding and being very aware of destructive presences. But sometimes, because the only way you can be aware of them is if you've also let them in, and sometimes that can be very destructive. And there's also just more of an awareness of destructive energy in general and how to work with it. And a lot of that's just about that solar trip down. You get to Sagittarius. I think this is one of the more misunderstood signs personally. Sag, you have another double-bodied sign who's making that turn around light and dark. At the end of Sag, we're moving from darkness going all the way down to the bottom and then starting to rise again. So the very end of Sagittarius, you can see the sun starting to slowly level out, and it's like you can almost anticipate it's going to start lifting again. So that sense of going all the way down to the bottom and then your momentum starting to pick you back up. When I think of Sagittarius and a lot of the qualities, you'll have these weird dualities. You'll have like the person who could be totally destructive party crasher, like a wild child, but then you also have like the wisdom of sages. Sagittarius related etymologically to the word sage. So what I think, the reason I think that that's the case is because really what you have is you have a deep dive into darkness, but you have this redemptive turn coming at the end. And it's very fitting. It fits very nicely with the ancient ruler Zeus, right? Who was often very destructive, angry, boastful, hypocritical, but also was the god associated with societal order, like the cosmocrat that brings order to the universe or the cosmos. So, in Sag, I think, for example, of like if you ever watched Woody Allen movies back in the day, and I'm not sure if he's very tasteful to mention anymore, but if you remember Woody Allen movies, like old Woody Allen movies, he was always a pessimist. He's got a bunch of Sag energy in his chart. He was always a pessimist paired next to usually like Diane Keaton, who was like an optimist. And I think that in Sagittarius you have it's a lot like or like Maverick from Top Gun, where you have this kind of destructive wild child, but they're also a redeemer, or they also have more insight than others, but it's specifically because there's kind of this reckless streak. So that duality of like reckless, dark, destructive, and also uplifting, wise, that also perfectly is embodied in the figure of centaurs in Greek mythology. But that's also related to the light. It's going down and then it's lifting up at the end. So Capricorn is much more fundamentally now about the turn into the light half of the dark side of the year. So that means that this is like the yang half of the yin. And so you're starting to see light emerging from within the darkness. And with Capricorn, now from the basement of the sun's journey, you're fixed back up at the pole star. And a lot of people, I think, grasp this one very easily. Like, I think Cap is sort of the easiest to grasp, the long, slow, steady progression toward, successive hierarchical accomplishments en route to some ideal. At the worst, that might be tyrannical, hierarchical capitalism, but at its best, it's also the kind of grit that you need to progress along any path of study, or any kind of practice you want to get better at something, whatever. So all those things, but where do they come from? And I think this one most people know is, in a sense, it's probably in the earliest astronomical sense, it's that understanding that the light is returning within the darkness and it's pointing up toward the pole star. But this return of light is not the optimism. It's not a redemptive optimism like Sagittarius. It is a cold, earthy, like it's very familiar with darkness still, but it's long, cold, earthy, hard, kind of more practical like that. Anyway, there's more I could say, but so you get into Aquarius. Now, Aquarius in ancient astrology is a Saturn-ruled sign, and I think it's really important to mention that because in Aquarius now the light is still, we're moving up toward the pole star. We're still in the dark half of the year. This is very much about, if you think about the fixity of light within the darkness, the contrast between progress and the past is tremendously, that tension is tremendously strong in Aquarius. Are we progressing or are we moving backward? Whether it's science or culture or, politics or whatever. And of course, you can see people all over the political spectrum that have strong Aquarian energy. So it's not like having Aquarian energy guarantees that you will be a political progressive, right? But it's a very strong sense that we often identify in Aquarius with, is this progress? Is it pushing me forward toward the future? Or is it more of the status quo? And I think the reason that duality is so intense in Aquarius is because you're talking about the stabilization of light within the darkness at a stage where the light has not taken over yet. So it's pointing us toward the future. And it's essentially a period where it's another really nuanced one where it's like light is not yet to the place where we want it to be, but we're stabilizing the ascent of light. So it's a lot of that has to do with revolution, with the sense of it being like a stabilization of a kind of a revolutionary impulse or energy in the middle of winter. And then you get to Pisces, double-bodied sign, and now you're at the place of two natures simultaneously. We're switching into the spring season where light takes over. It is in my opinion, Pisces is one of the most yang of the feminine signs, so to speak, or of the yin signs. And that's probably because in part there's this turning point in Pisces where you can see it. It's like rise. It's like the dawn coming up, but you can't see the ball of the sun yet, So you're either driven mad by that, right? You're either in anticipation, in longing, and then instead of feeling an ecstasy in that longing, dreaming, wishing, hoping for the ball of the sun to rise, instead you feel driven mad by it divine discontent, and then people feel like they can see something, on the horizon. They can't taste it. They can't grasp it. This is because Pisces is moving us into this place where light takes over, but it's not yet there, and it's emerging out of the darkness. So it's Pisces is a sign where the fringiness of that transition is so strong, and I think that has a lot to do with why you find dreamers and idealists who have a kind of restless dissatisfaction. It's that wrestling with the emergence of light that's happening. So anyway, that's a very short version of what I usually do in like 6 hours, but
Yeah, well, look,
there it is.
No one does astrology like you. And that's part of what I love about your astrology so much. That mystical perspective, that understanding, the whole new way in which you help me look at the sky, look at the signs, look at the planets, look at the houses. I'm sure that you're going to bring so much to this incredible course. So once again, you guys, Acyuta-bhava Das is coming to Synchronicity University, and I'm so proud to have this caliber of big dog astrologer at my school at Synchronicity University. And for a very limited time, you can choose your tuition rate as low as just $5 a class. So if you go to synchronicityuniversity.com, you can learn a lot more about the course, and you can sign up there as well. Acyuta-bhava Das. I adore you. I just really adore you as an astrologer. I think you're so brilliant. I love what you do. I love that you bring God into it. You bring love into it. Like what I call love and wisdom, you call God, and you'll just say it that way, and you bring it. And it's like this reminder that what we're doing has not just very sacred roots, but it can continue as a very sacred practice in our modern context. And gosh, you bring so much love to what you do. Your work just radiates love. I love that about it.
Oh, thanks, Nadiya. Yeah, I feel the same way about you, and it's just really good to be back hanging out with you. And yeah, I can't wait to see everyone and hang out with all of you out there listening too.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And thank you, everybody out there, for watching. And until we connect again, take care. Bye.